Welcome back to the Roll-Up High Roller community. As always, nothing on the roll-up is to be construed as financial advice. We are just educators in the DeFi space. Toss us a quick like, give us a share, a repost, send it to a friend who may want to watch this, and finally, give us a sub or a follow. It means the world to help support credibly neutral educational content in DeFi. We're here to educate, empower, and enrich you, and let's jump in. What's going on, guys? We're here at the Staking Summit live today, put on by StakingRewards.com. We've got our boy Killian with us. We're back on the roll-up. Killian, how you doing today? It's been a good day.
Yeah, it's been a busy day. Day 2 of the Staking Summit, so been a massive success so far, so can't complain.
Yeah, one of the really cool things that I've been learning about, just going to dive straight into the weeds here, is this idea of DVT and how we can basically lower the amount of ETH needed to participate in staking. And I think this is something that's super, super important. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think it's very much needed. And I think there's two elements to it. Like, number one, more people can take part in running their own node at home. And secondly, it brings a community aspect to it, right? So you can team up with a bunch of your mates or just even people from all around the world, and you can set up a DVT node together and then share the keys amongst yourselves. And then the good thing about it is the network becomes more resilient. It's got that community aspect and more people can take part. So I think we haven't seen anything yet for it. I'm expecting there to be marketplaces for DVT staking where you can pair up with people. I know a lot of people like the dating sites, but maybe in the crypto space, this becomes the next big thing. So yeah, let's see.
Yeah, I mean, I think it enables all user types to join staking, and we had touched on this with you guys having a really broad kind of user base of users, and I think that this kind of allows that newer, smaller crypto curious base to kind of come about. I know we already touched on it previously, but what is the user base that you guys are seeing at Staking Rewards? Is it a lot of one-sided institutional flows, or has DVT allowed more kind of smaller and more crypto-curious people come about?
Yeah, of course. So at Staking Rewards, we generally service three almost user bases. So we have the protocols on one side, we've got the staking providers that are running nodes on those protocols, and then we've got the users on our website that are coming to our site to look for new yield opportunities, and to specifically look at, what can I earn if I want to stake ETH, DOT, Cosmos, Solana, whatever you want. And so we try and service those three verticals. In terms of how DVT has impacted that, we've worked quite a lot now with the SSV and with OBOL. And so I think people are starting to get more interested in it through content, through tutorials. I mean, they're both sponsors here at the Staking Summit, so they're becoming more ingrained in the community. And I think that's their strategy. So as people start to learn about it, the adoption grows. For example, Diva protocol, they have DVT sort of implemented at the protocol level. And so they're also one of the new LSTs on the market. But what they did is they had a workshop today, right? And so the point of the workshop was to show how easy it is for you to set up a DVT node, right? Form part of a cluster and to start running a validator on Ethereum. And so within the workshop, I took part of the workshop and took part in the workshop, and within 30 minutes I'm currently now running a validator node on testnet for Diva protocol, right? So I think it shows you, like, I'm not necessarily a developer, but yet I can follow a set of instructions, I can set up my node, and I have a reasonable degree of confidence that I actually know what's going on. Whereas before, things might have been a little bit scary, and I think people sometimes take that for granted, right? You want people to start looking into it and not to be discouraged. And so workshops like this, where people get educated, they walk through the process, it's very reassuring, and it's very exciting to be able to say you're taking part in decentralizing Ethereum and helping the broader crypto space by doing that.
Yeah, no, totally agreeing. Those workshops are very important for onboarding, right? It's like, things like that are kind of like why we are even in the education space. It's this kind of like public good angle of like, let's onboard people and try to make it easy for them Now, kind of getting more into the weeds, because we love to just get deep into the tech and just understand how this works and what the trade-offs are. So DVT, distributed validator technology, it allows you to have kind of one ETH or less than one ETH, even in some cases. Like I think Clay Stack has like a 0 ETH, and they have different bond underwriters and things. But effectively, let's say a small amount of ETH to distribute into the pool, into these clusters.
Yeah.
What is the trade-off with these clusters? Like, how do you manage decentralization at like the execution client, the consensus client level? Like, where does that really happen? So that way that, just because users are using small amounts, it's not going to centralize this kind of force. It's going to allow it to still remain in this quote unquote decentralized fashion.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think the key is if we look at how we got to this point now, we started off with you need 32 ETH to run the validator, and you still need that. Then Rocketpool came along. Now you can start a Rocketpool mini pool, and so now you as a validator running a Rocketpool node would only need 16 ETH. Now Rocketpool did a further upgrade. Now you only need 8 ETH. Then Diva Protocol came along. Now you only need 1 ETH, right? So I'm expecting that to continue. In terms of the specific risks and trade-offs with that, I'm sure you can find that in the documentation. I don't know the exact details behind that, but by way of example, why this is important is, for example, with Diva or Rocketpool, now because of DBT, you can split validator keys up between different node operators. So what does that look like? Let's say you and your mates, you've got 16 different friends, nice big friend group, and you guys all want to run a node, right? So now you can take those validator keys and you can split them up between you and all your friends. But now your friend lives in Asia, the other one lives in the US, the other one lives in South Africa like me, the other one's in Europe, and the other one's in Alaska, right? Now each of you are running your node. Now let's say for me in South Africa, and this is a real world issue, right? In our country, we actually don't have electricity 24 hours of the day, right? So we have rolling power outages every single day between 4 to 8 hours. Okay, now for me, if I'm running my node at home, that means I'm going to go offline 4 to 8 hours of the day, unless I buy a backup power supply. But that's not always capitally, let's say I can't afford that. So now what am I meant to do? Now, in the case where you need 32 ETH, my node would go offline and I would be getting slashed.
Right.
And I don't want to get slashed, right? So DVT makes this possible because now while I am offline, assuming depending on the structure, but we can still reach consensus with, let's say 66% of the other people that are in sort of in the cluster. So that means you as my mates can actually carry me while I'm offline.
Yep.
And there's no effect to the performance. And it also improves the redundancy and resiliency of the Ethereum network, because then even if 2 of us go offline, but everyone else is still online, everything's still fine, right? So I think that's a really interesting thing to think about, because if you want to decentralize, you have to geographically decentralize across the entire world. But when you get to third world countries, like in Africa, where it's literally a reality, you don't have electricity 24 hours of the day, how do you get around that?
Yeah.
DVT steps in by lowering the bond, but also increasing the resiliency. And now suddenly things become a lot more interesting. So now I don't even have to worry about my electricity going off, because I know that the other guys in the cluster can carry me while I'm not.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and you basically can take one node of Ethereum, which could be one home staker, for example, or one batch that Lido or Rocketpool would put together with 32 or even 8 or 16, and you could decentralize that entirely amongst 32 or 16 or 8 people across the world. And if I'm not mistaken, there's also other infrastructure providers here at the conference that also operate mostly within different regions of the world too, right? So as an entity like like one of these staking providers, you can kind of pick and choose different infrastructure providers and spread yourself out amongst Obol, SSV, Chorus One, or others that are kind of located in different areas too, right?
Exactly. So some of them will run bare metal infrastructure, and that would be physically located somewhere, but then others would be using cloud hosting solutions, which might have a regional servers and stuff in Europe or Asia or the US. But if you think about like, if you get going down to the weeds, like those guys can still be shut down, right? So if the government's like, hey, you can't do this anymore, or Amazon or Google or one of those bigger players that they might be using says, sorry, we can't do this anymore, then there's an issue, right? So when it gets to DBT and you get individual people actually running a node in their own house, that is the real kicker and the real important part. People need to realize that this increases the decentralization drastically, because by lowering the sort of entry barrier to get in, more people can get in, and that's important because most people don't have 32E, right? So I think you want more individuals running nodes at home, because corporations that are commercially providing staking services, I mean, they're good and they have an important part to play in the ecosystem, but they do not necessarily contribute to true decentralization.
Yeah, as would thousands of individuals.
So,
and even if those individuals are still small amounts, it's still just the network separation, right? Where like you say, like what if something happened, and these are all like hypotheticals, but where one whole continent or one whole country went off the globe for 1 hour, right? And if that had if that one area had a strong amount of, or a strong percentage of different nodes, that would be a problem, right? But if we could kind of separate that, then that's really interesting. And I think just kind of switching gears as we kind of wrap up this chat, I think that slashing is one thing that is really interesting. And I was just talking to the guys from ClayStack, and they brought up that Ethereum is one of the only proof of stake networks that actually does not have deterministic slashing, meaning you don't really know what your penalty is going to be if you get slashed on Ethereum. Whereas Polygon or LivePeer or Binance or etc., there's a set penalty. Could you please explain to the audience like what slashing is, how it happens, why it happens, how to avoid it, and then we can kind of touch on like MEV and how different companies take advantage of it too.
Yeah, sure. So slashing is basically an intrinsic part of every proof of stake protocol. So to like dumb it down and make it as simple as possible, to become a validator on a network, you need to put something at stake, hence the term staking. Now, why do you have to put something at stake? Because if you act contrary to the rules of the network, it must cost you, right? Because you should be disincentivized to be doing dodgy stuff on the network. So you put something at stake, then that would incentivize you to act, in a trustworthy way and in line with the rules of the network. Because why? Because you can lose what you've put at stake, and because it has monetary value, you most likely will, be incentivized economically to stay in line with the rules of the network. So that's what like the core of slashing is. And so in terms of like how users need to think about it, in the staking world, it's actually not as risky as people think. If anyone's like dived into DeFi protocols and the different yield opportunities available there, like that's far more risky than yields that you're generating from staking. So I think like sometimes people can think about slashing and be like, oh my word, I can lose my entire staking balance.
Right.
Theoretically, you could on some networks, but it's highly unlikely because if you choose a good staking provider, you mitigate most of that risk, right? That's why StakingRewards introduced the verified staking provider program, because a lot of users were coming to us and be like, hey guys, who should we stake with?
Right.
And because us as a data aggregator, we don't run any nodes ourselves, but we couldn't objectively say, hey, you should stake with this guy or stake with this guy. And so we developed the VSP, this program, to establish a standard for what are the best staking providers in the world doing, what is their operational procedures, what is the benchmark, right?
Yeah.
And so we, staking providers that want to become a part of that have to apply to join the program. We do the verification, and then they show up as verified on our platform, which is a signal to stakers looking for trustworthy validators to say, hey, we've vetted these guys. If you trust StakingRewards and our methodology, which is publicly available, then you can trust validator. So, if you want to know, like, how do I mitigate this risk of slashing? From my perspective, step one would be only consider verified staking providers. And then step two would be a lot of these larger players actually have slashing insurance.
Okay.
So that would come from like QuantStamp and Chain Group. They have that type of offering, or Nexus Mutual. There's a bunch of different insurance offerings. And so if you do see that they have that available, then you should be okay. Because even in the unlikely event of some slashing event happening, they would have insurance for that. And oftentimes these guys would even plug the hole. If there was money lost, they would from their own cash reserves pay for that. Why? Because their reputation is worth more than, let's say, $1 million that they lose for whatever reason. Because if they have a reputation as a validator as being slashed, that's like the number one thing you do not want.
Yeah, you don't want to be a part of that validator,
exactly.
Right?
So, I would like to encourage people to think about slashing differently. Like, it is the number one thing these guys are trying to avoid. And if they have a half decent operation, they will avoid it.
Yeah.
Right? So people shouldn't worry about it too much. And sort of the whole system is designed to incentivize these guys to have the best possible setup to not get slashed, because it would cost them, number one, economically, but two, reputationally.
Yeah.
So I personally don't see it as a massive thing, especially if these guys have done the due diligence through the verified.
If they're a VSP, right? Yeah, and I'm glad to hear about that, because I for one had no idea that exists, and I've heard VSP multiple times today. I've been thinking about how that's defined, but it seems like a lot of these protocols come through you guys, and then through your site, you can see a lot of this activity, right? We went through the different staking calculators and the different kind of aspects to your site, which allow people to really understand what they're going to get, the risks and the upsides. And I think like the last thing here is there's MEV in staking, right? Yeah. So there are different validators that capture MEV, specifically in Ethereum as well as other networks, and then they actually earn their stakers more yield, and other validators earn less, right? So how do you think about that? And like, are there consistently validators or companies in a non-biased way that are outperforming others because of MEV or because of better strategies? Yeah.
So I think it's quite a complex topic, but some validators opt in to MEV, so they try and capture it for people that have staked with them.
Yes.
But it's not that straightforward for them to do from a regulatory standpoint.
Okay.
And also some clients just don't want it because it can be a gray area. So
it's got a negative tone almost.
Almost a negative tone, because it can some people see it as a negative externality, like they're sort of taking and what's the word, like, because it comes from front running and different things like that. But it can almost come across as like you're stealing from an unsuspecting user, and then it's coming to you. And again, I personally don't see an issue with it, but other people might. So I think from our perspective, we see some validators capturing it, others are not. Others are thinking about it from the ethical standpoint, others are looking at it from the regulatory standpoint. So you don't see it like across the board that all of them are capturing it. But definitely some of the larger players like Glido and Rocket Pool, like Rocket Pool has something called a smoothing pool. So it's essentially you can take part in this pool with a bunch of other node operators, and any MEV blocks that are earned or that are sort of processed by those validators goes into this pool. And because there's obviously a lot more of you, the likelihood of receiving these MEV blocks increases, but because it's in the pool, it gets shared with everyone in the pool. So that's like an opt-in thing that Rocket Pool has, and so it varies from from like sort of staking provider to staking provider, but it's definitely something that's growing. It's an important part of the space, and it's something that's interesting to keep an eye on.
Yeah, so some validators offer it and some don't, and then as a user within the ones which do, you sometimes have a choice whether or not, like in Rocket Pool's case, you have a choice. But perhaps in others, it might just be like the standard.
Exactly. So I think we'll see more of that, where the user base has the choice to opt in, versus to not opt in. And
what do you think? Do you think users will see the higher yield and be like, "Yeah, what the hell?" Or do you?
I think like commercial retail users. I would be like, give me more yield.
Again, it comes down to the same thing. Like, do users really care at this current point about decentralization, about trustlessness, about these things? And like, you want to say yes, that's why we're building here. But ultimately, like, I think they see higher number, and it's like, yeah,
Exactly. I think it's a spectrum, right? So
for sure.
you'll see, even at this conference, there's a spectrum, and depending on where you're on the spectrum, you'll be more aligned with this or more aligned with that. So I think from a commercial standpoint, a lot of these companies will try and cater to everyone on the spectrum,
Yeah.
or will only focus on one end of the spectrum.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
for example, like a Testant, which is a massive institutional staking provider, was chatting to them earlier today, and they just focus on Ethereum. They just that's their bread and butter. Not really looking to expand to new chains, and it works for them, right?
Yeah.
So they're not trying to cater to retail. They're not trying to cater to anyone else on the spectrum. They're just focusing on that, and it works, right? But then there's another sort of aspect where a different staking provider might be just focused on retail, and that's totally okay, and that's the beauty of it, right? It's an ecosystem.
Yeah.
Every part and every company has their part to play in making it a healthy ecosystem. So yeah,
it's certainly exciting, and different parts make up the puzzle, right? So I appreciate your time today, Killian. It's been a pleasure.
Cool. Thanks so much.
Chat.
Cheers, guys.
And thank you.
All right. Cheers. Cool.